Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, we'll be talking about all things legal with one of the best lawyers in the state of Texas. That's next.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, employees are slowly getting back to the office here in Texas, and that means some legal pitfalls, especially for employers who are too aggressive when it comes to getting employees back to work. To talk about that today, Jay Forester, he's one of the founding partners of Forester Haynie. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
Well, if you look back a year ago, there was no playbook for COVID. We didn't know what to do. And so in not a single employee handbook on the face of the planet was there a clause that says COVID, vaccinations. So it's created a lot of questions for employers, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, I have a law firm myself. So, speaking as an employer myself, what we've repeated throughout this is, hey, there's no COVID policy. We're increasingly optimistic that COVID isn't going to be here forever, but you have to have a plan. So I think if you're an employer out there, we're going to talk about that today and different things that you should incorporate into your plan. And as I represent employees, I'm always happy to share that perspective as well.
So an employer calls you and says, hey, I don't know whether to require masks. I don't know whether to require vaccines. What advice do you give?
Well, Jeff, the joke that all lawyers, when they're on shows like this, like to go to is say, it depends. So I'll throw out the classic, it depends. But first, I'd want to know who you are and, who are the types of people that you employ or that are perhaps visiting your facility. As I mentioned, our company, we started off just a few years ago as a relatively small company, but this year we passed the cycle of our 15th employee. There are a lot of federal laws that start to apply when you have 15 employees, and then a whole slew of other laws that start to apply when you have 50 employees. So first, I would want to know, who are you, and how many people do you employ, and what are the types of people that are visiting your work site?
Yes. Talk about your journey. How did you get into law?
Well, I would credit it largely with my mother. She is a U.S. history teacher. And as a woman of her generation, I think she wanted to be a lawyer. She always talks about a teacher she had, and that teacher led her into teaching. And I can't help but wonder if maybe at some point someone said, hey, why don't you become a teacher rather than a lawyer? So she was very supportive of me having this journey. When I was a young child, I had all the presidents on my wall. I was told over and over again, they went to law school. And then graduated from SMU and have been a lawyer here since 2013.
Yes. One of my favorite things from your website is your hashtag work shouldn't suck campaign. I love that. Tell me where that came from.
I worked at a few companies, but before starting this law firm with my business partner, Matthew Haynie. And a lot of the things that we talked about is, we don't want to just represent people for one case, but we want to be the law firm that and you come back to. A lot of employees cycle out of jobs now in under a year, and we don't want that. I grew up in a family business, and I'm very proud of the track record that we, as a company, we employed people in Dallas for decades. So, frankly, the employer-employee relationship is hard, but I think one thing that employees want to know first and foremost is not necessarily that they're being paid the most, not necessarily that they have the fanciest office even, but it's really that their employer cares about them. And a lot of the people that we hear from are, frankly, it's the most minute things of, their kid had a soccer game on Friday and they couldn't take off an hour early. And so that's the ethos that we approached our cases. And for a variety of reasons, we really wanted to, live and breathe that as a company.
Jay, I also saw on your website, pizza drivers. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we primarily represent individuals nationwide in class, mass, or multi-plaintiff litigation. What that means is you often see other law firms that they're advertising for car accident cases. We don't do any of that. Our really bread and butter is we represent multiple people at a time. And when I drilled down to it and we saw that a lot of our competitors in the class action space, we saw a lot of them that they brought cases against Facebook, Google, Exxon. They were still looking for the biggest companies with the biggest reward at the end of the day. So I enforce a law called the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act does three things. It makes sure that we don't have child labor, it regulates overtime, and it set a minimum wage. Fortunately, child labor is largely a thing of the past. Overtime, there's a lot of our competitors that they focus on overtime cases. So we found that there are a lot of people that in 2020, 2021, we're still not being paid in compliance with minimum wage. And tipped workers are really that area. Probably the largest cadre nationwide is pizza drivers. And so I've, since 2016 or so, I've narrowed down to where I'm primarily representing pizza delivery drivers nationwide.
And I should just brag on you. You're working on some really big cases currently. One of them is you're suing the Diocese of Tucson. Tell us about that lawsuit.
Well, as you can imagine with specific lawsuits, there's limitations on what I can share. But I will say that over the last few years, as I think our country has had a different awareness, we have heard from scores of not only women, but frankly, young boys that in their childhood, they suffered abuse that as a child, I never could imagine. And, as we've continued to think about our firm long term and we think about who we're representing, we decided that there's people that they need to have a voice. And so even though these cases might be a little hard, we're going to take them on. It's actually laws in the last few years that have, people, I think because of shows like yours, getting awareness of, hey, this is an issue that's important. We need to make sure our legislatures are focusing on this. Arizona passed a law that allowed people up until December 31st, 2020, that if they had any sort of past abuse, it didn't matter if it was decades old. And so that's how we're, we saw that big picture, and we have cases in Arizona and California, and we're hopeful that Texas will catch up and the Texans will consider making some of these legislative changes.
You also have been named several times to the Best Lawyers Under 40 by D Magazine. What does that feel like?
It feels like I'm lucky to have a lot of friends and good coworkers that will give me recognition that may or may not have been deserved. But one of my favorite sports heroes was Troy Aikman, and Troy Aikman gets a lot of attention, but everyone in Dallas knows that Troy Aikman was only Troy Aikman because of the triplets. And so we actually had 3 lawyers in our firm this past year that got that recognition.
Wow.
And, so yeah.
That's very impressive. Go Cowboys. Okay, we've only got about a minute left. So for the person watching who says, I don't know if I have a case, what is it like to engage you? I guess the initial phone call is absolutely free, isn't it? Just to find out if you do have a case?
Yeah, it's free. And, we employ a lot of non-lawyers too, because I hear it all the time at a party, you're a lawyer, and I'm the last person people want to talk to. So we have a very talented staff who's always there and happy to talk to you. At the same time, I hope if nothing else, you see that I'm not too scary. And we understand that the individuals that we represent are normal people. And so that's why we embrace #work shouldn't suck, because we want you to know that we're normal people too.
Awesome. This has been a great segment. We're going to have you back soon. We're going to put the website up to end the segment. ForesterHaynie.com is the website. Jay Forester, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jeff.
You bet. And that's it for now. We'll see you next time.